Coming up on this episode of FAS TV, the value of working closely with your vet in the run-up to calving. We meet the crofter who spent the last 7 years reintroducing native trees, and we've an update on prices and trends in the beef cattle market. As the daylight hours lengthen, farmers across Scotland are getting ready for a busy spring. Auckland Farm near Ayr is an 800-acre upland beef and sheep farm with 180 spring calving suckler cows and around 900 Cheviot-bred ewes. Vets play a crucial role in herd management at Auckland, ensuring that cows are in the best possible condition in the run-up to calving.
We always have worked closely with the vet at Auckland. I think it's important to do so, to have a good relationship with the vet. The vet at Auckland, since we started working with Armour Vet Group, they've played a pivotal role in Auckland's beef herd and the sheep.
My name is Ed Hewitt. I work for Armour Vet Group based in Auckland. I've been working there since I graduated back in 1997, so this year I celebrate 25 years of working for Armour Vet Group, or Armour Vet Group as it is now. Over the course of the last 25 years, the farmers have changed in some of their objectives. There is definitely more veterinary involvement as opposed to doing the routine kind of work or the fire brigade work. We're now proactively involved on a significant number of beef and dairy farms. Having data is really useful, really important, and there's certainly a much more scientific approach to what we're doing in most of our beef farms across the practice. The role we have in the system at Auckland, we have a very good working relationship with David and his dad, and we have done for a number of years. David's keen for input and our opinion. Whether he acts on that, that's entirely up to him. No, we have a reasonable amount of input to the day-to-day running and objectives of the farm as a whole over the course of a year. The objectives for Auckland, probably for the run-up towards calving, will be making sure that calving runs as smooth as it possibly can do, and that will mean primarily looking at the nutrition of these cows in the last 3 to 4 weeks pre-calving, and obviously the management of the calves post-calving as well. Nutrition is key in that 3 to 4 weeks period prior to calving, and there are a number of things you can do, but you need to have some information or some data to hand in order to make sensible decisions based on that. We'd be keen to look at some silage analysis. We would be keen to walk amongst the cows and just see what the cows look like. You know, are they fit? Are they thin? Are we need to adjust the overall ration? And we would also then like to take some bloods. We generally take the bloods at Auckland 3 to 4 weeks pre-calving. That gives us some time to get the results back and also some time then to tweak the diet if required prior to the calving period. The ideal target time for metabolic profiling, if you read the literature, is 2 to 3 weeks pre-calving, which is quite tight for getting the blood samples done, sent away and results back, and then being able to do something with the ration. So we aim for about 4 weeks. It's a bit of a compromise, but it allows us then potentially to alter the ration in a usable format. David's calving is quite tight, so he doesn't have a lot of tail ender, so we need to get it right for the start of calving. So yeah, 4 to 3 weeks. The investment in time and effort pre-calving, looking at metabolic profiles, making sure the diet is right, pays dividends because your colostrum quality should then be where it should be when the cows calve. Colostrum quality is absolutely essential to calf health in that first month to 6 weeks. So I've had a look around the cows here today, and I would have said they're looking pretty much spot on for body condition score, approximately 2.5 to 3, and yeah, that's just where we want them prior to calving. When we come to Auckland to do a metabolic profile, we generally select between 5 and 6 animals. Ideally, what I'm looking for are ordinary animals. I don't want any of the outliers. I just want a bog standard cow. I don't want necessarily a fat one, necessarily a thin one. I just want a nice sample of what's on the farm. We then take a blood sample, body condition score the cow as well, to give us an indication as to, you know, are they too fit, are they too thin, or is there anything else we can do there, and then the sample sent off to the lab. Return time on the samples is usually 5 to 6 days, depending And then after that we can then make a decision: are we going to change the ration, are we going to increase silage quantities, are we going to add some minerals, change the minerals, etc. But decisions are made based on the blood samples that I've taken. It's often a surprise to me when you get the blood results back. You can go to the farm and you can see cows that look reasonably fit, and you think these cows are doing okay, and there can be underlying issues which are not necessarily immediately identifiable when you're looking at the cows. A good example could be iodine content of the diet and what level the cows have iodine. And you're only going to find out issues with iodine when you get to calving time, and you've got potentially an increased number of slow calvings or stillbirths. So identifying that pre-calving is a really useful thing to do, and not something you can necessarily identify either looking at a silage analysis or looking at the cows in general. Last year was a really good summer for livestock in general in this area, and it's probably fair to say that we are probably seeing cows on the fatter side on most farms, although there are still some farms where the cows are potentially not as in good condition as they could be. But I would probably say in general the cows are a bit fitter than they've been in previous years. Cows that are fit at calving time can have just as many problems as cows that are thin or lean at calving time, and that's why doing a metabolic profile was a really useful way of finding out what exactly is going on with these cows.
Engaging with your vet in preparation for calving will pay dividends, improving animal welfare, profitability, and also reducing the carbon footprint. Integrating trees on your farm or croft has multiple benefits for livestock, wildlife, and enhancing conservation and biodiversity. Graham Pringle is a new entrant crofter at Delbog Croft in the Cairngorm National Park. He's spent the last 7 years regenerating the landscape and bringing it back into productive use.
The benefit of regeneration is areas that have been overgrazed are now being protected. We're encouraging new grazing to the area. So this is benefiting the animals, it's benefiting the income from the area. What was starting to go downhill quite rapidly has been regenerated. So shelter from the new trees is vitally important. Being the Cairngorm National Park, we have 100-mile-an-hour winds regularly coming through this area. So as much shelter as possible is important for our grazing. Improving the biodiversity. This area already has a very rich biodiversity. What we have to do is protect it. If we overgraze, if we have too many animals, if we have too many of the one type of tree, then the biodiversity is lost. We want to see the rich biodiversity of the national park in this croft. So the croft itself is approximately 50 hectares. And in this 50 hectares, we range from bogland to mountain to moorland. Our most recent project is a regeneration of the Caledonian forest. This is the native forest to this area. It's a mixture of Scots pine and broadleaf. We have approximately 30,000 trees which we have planted. All have been sourced from the Abernethy seed source. This was very important that we didn't bring other species into the area. It had to be native to this area. The reason we did this was this area was always forested, but it was lost during the 1914 to 1918 conflict, and it wasn't renewed. What happened after there was the area was heavily grazed, so no new regeneration occurred. The objective was to reintroduce this native forest to the national park. By reintroducing the native forest to the national park, we're increasing the biodiversity of the land. It's also, from a crofting point of view, it is ideal for shelter belt. It's protecting the animals, it's encouraging the local grazing, and in the long term will be a commercial crop. We have been given significant funding for these projects. 2 projects. One was a stock exclusion zone. This was to try and take the ancient forest that's existing at Delbog Croft and allow the new shoots to come through. This has been extremely successful with the aspens. This area did have a significant number of aspens which were getting lost due to age. Now we have a massive amount of regeneration going on there. The second project which we've been given the grant is for the new forest. The new forest is the Caledonian forest for the Cairngorm National Park. The funding that came for there was quite significant. It's not 100%, but it does cover infrastructure, roads, fencing and shelter. This is important from being a crofting point of view. It allows us to invest in areas that we didn't normally have the capital to do. One drawback is you do have to have the capital up front first. That is probably the biggest sticking point for these projects. You do have to have the capital, you have to spend it, then it takes at least 12 months till you get this back. The project took 3 years to get off the ground because I didn't have the capital to start with. So they allowed me to split it over 3 years. So the first project was to get the internal exclusion zone set up with stock fencing. The second one was to enclose the croft with 2-metre deer fencing. And the third was to actually plant the trees. Advice I would give to other farmers or other crofters, if you're looking to take a project on like this, don't look at it as a short income. This is a long-term project. It does have a large capital outlay to start with, but you will get this back. And then once you have the money back, you get a maintenance grant over the next 6 years. This maintenance grant will compensate you for the loss of land and possibly the loss of the grazing area. The long-term benefit to the croft way outweighs any loss that you're taking over the first couple of years. The ultimate goal of the croft is to be commercial. It's always, you have to think, what are you getting back? What you put into the croft, are you getting it back? Is it sustainable? But you're also responsible, being in a national park, we're also responsible, you're only a custodian of the land. You have to maintain the biodiversity, you have to maintain the variety of wildlife in this area and be fully aware. Yes, you make a profit, but yes, you have to be mindful of what you're doing to the land.
My name's Hilary Grant. I'm a Senior Agriculture and Climate Change Policy Advisor in the Scottish Government. So my job is all about trying to help the Scottish agriculture sector decarbonise. I run the Integrated Trees Network with Lynn White from Scottish Forestry as well. The Integrated Tree Network is a farmer and crofter-led initiative which seeks to help farmers to understand how and why they should plant trees on their farm. We have 6 host farmers which build a strong network of farm woodland demonstrator sites across Scotland, and they've planted trees and are showcasing how that's benefited their business through the network. We put on a range of free events which you can come to and hear all about planting trees, how that could benefit your business, and the ins and outs of the practicalities, opportunities, challenges and outcomes for planting trees. The Integrated Trees Network is a joint initiative between the Scottish Government and Scottish Forestry. We know that farmers are part of the solution to climate change, and integrating trees into farm businesses is a really important part of that. Scotland's woodlands are a vital national resource, and they're really important to rural development and sustainable land use. Integrating trees has business benefits as well as environmental ones. We hear from our host farmers about how planting trees has helped to improve their productivity, reduce their costs and help to diversify their businesses. There are, of course, environmental benefits to planting trees, and with the twin biodiversity and climate crises, that's really important. The integration of woodland into farms is an important part of the woodland creation picture in Scotland. The Forestry Grant Scheme, over half of the applications to that scheme are for small woodlands of 20 hectares or under, and they tend to form part of an existing agricultural business. We know that farmers and crofters are already integrating trees into their business and seeing the benefits. Our mantra is the right tree in the right place for the right reason, and I think that's a really good place to start. So your reason's probably where you want to kick off. What's your objective for planting trees? How does it fit into your farm business? Are you more interested in timber production, or are you thinking about how it will help with your productivity, for example, by providing some shade and shelter for your livestock? I think once you have that part, it's kind of where you want to start. Once you have your reason, you can think about your place and your tree. So, like any other crop, your soil type, climatic conditions, and your site location are all going to impact on what tree is best for you. You might want to find areas on your farm that maybe aren't quite as good for livestock production, but could be a really, really good place to plant trees. One of our host's key messages was to work with what you've got, not against it, and I think that's a good thing to think about. Last but not least, I think it's good to remember that you don't need to do it alone. There's lots of advice and support out there. The Integrated Trees Network, of course, can offer a place to come to hear a little bit and get to meet other farmers who've planted trees already. We have lots of other resources on our web pages that can point you to other people who can also help. For example, your local woodland officer is a great person to go and talk to. We have an event on the 24th of February, which is looking at the woodland creation for biodiversity. You can find links to our Eventbrite to sign up on our website. There are places available and it is free. We have also recently hosted one of our Teas and Trees for Crofters events, which is an event especially for crofters to come along, have a cup of tea and have a chat about their experiences of planting trees and ask questions of their peers. We started these events on the back of farmers and crofters raising at some of our events how that's something they would quite like to have, and that's the basis of how we've developed the network. So if there is anything that you want to hear about and you would like us to do more on, please get in touch and let us know.
Gavin Hill, Senior Beef Specialist at SEC Consulting today.
Leslie Wiley, Beef Specialist, SEC Consulting. I think what we've seen in the last year is the finished cattle trade being really strong, as strong as it's been for a number of years and for quite a prolonged part of the year, which installed a lot of confidence in the finishers. Towards the end of the year there was challenges there in terms of rising inputs and the fat price starting to fall back, which we're starting to see now. It's sitting around just above £4 at the moment. And for a long time £4 was the price we all wanted, but we just didn't expect the inputs the way they are at the moment, and the price of stores, which Gavin will touch on, being so strong, so that's impacting it. At the moment we're seeing a bit of a backlog within the processors, 2 to 3 weeks wait at some places to move cattle. It's common in January for the retail demand to be slow, and that kind of takes the pressure off the processors to kill significant numbers, which again can cause a bit of a backlog on farm. That combined with staffing issues from COVID and Brexit, where they just don't have the number of men online to kill at full capacity. So these things are all accumulating to basically slow the throughput going through processors, which isn't helping. And then at this time of year, as we see, cattle thrive at this time of year. Fat cattle do really well as the days start lengthening. And we start to see a 2-3 week wait have a real impact in terms of their fat cover and their finished weight, which will have a knock-on effect on the price. So it's just to be mindful, you know, to plan ahead if you can. Just have that communication with whoever you're supplying as to get these cattle moved. Gavin, you know, the store trade's just been so strong. Store
trade has been strong. If you look way back in the autumn of 2021, store market was buoyant. Tremendous year, forage supplies built up. Everybody was looking for a good year coming forward, and store cattle and wean calves maintained a very strong trade. And finishing price was high, so it really was a buoyant time for putting store cattle away. However, as the year developed more towards the end of November and start of December, there was a noticeable reduction in price at the store markets. Wean calves, sort of 7 to 8 months of age, took a fair old dip. The older, stronger stores maintained levels, came down a bit, but not in the same way as wean calves. Uncertainty crept into the market. We saw the price of fertiliser became a great big factor for everybody, and so these cattle were getting bought, the smaller, younger ones, were more long-term. So finishers really weren't prepared to commit too much of what was going to happen at grass, whether they were going to pay that price of fertiliser or not. The stronger cattle stayed up a little bit, only dropped a few pence because they can be finished shorter term indoors. And so we've found this great uncertainty at the moment of two things: input prices, feed and fertiliser prices. And these two still continue with us today, February. And so now store trades will be starting again, major ones starting at the start of March. Good strong cattle will maintain good prices, hopefully, but then we want to know what's actually going to happen with more stores coming into the market, because many farmers at the moment will be questioning, do I put cattle out to grass with that price of fertiliser at the moment, or do I put them to the market, in which we could get a fair influx of cattle coming onto the market, to which the finishers will also respond, are they prepared to pay these prices as well, because of the price of fertiliser and input costs. One good thing that's kept us going very strongly in the store trade over the last couple of months has been the actual number of cattle that have been bought in the store markets and have gone down into England. The English buyers like to come up here and buy store cattle. They're strong, three-quarter type limousines or Charlies, good strong cattle, well bred, and they've got good health status rather than going down to the south of England, and be able to take them back down to England, fill up their floats. Scottish auction markets have the big advantage of big numbers coming forward, and so these floats can be filled, go down there. English price has actually been stronger in many cases, both dead weight and live weight, in the English markets. We found in the back end of the year prices were quite phenomenal down in England, as limited amount of Irish beef was coming on the market. Now Irish beef is coming more and more into the UK, prices may take a bit of a dip, but in England, live market, where a very strong live market situation in England at the moment, actually a notable number of Scottish cattle going down there as well, taking heavier weights as well, good beef cattle, and they're filling in a lot to wholesalers, to local butchers, and so there's been a great buoyancy there for them. Abattoirs as well. Abattoirs are in supply, and in many areas of England, actually, there's quite a lot of abattoirs in many of the areas are very tight. Very concentrated areas. And so, actually, we've actually found, as many folk will say, that Scottish premium has been eroded. We'll have to wait and see how that happens. If the more and more Irish cattle come back into the market, you may find that the price differential between Scotland and England doesn't open up as much as it is at the moment. But what we've also got to remember is we're talking about the finishing trade, we're talking about the store market as well. Really, there's a great unknown at the moment. Most people are feeling that the back end of the year, prices were so buoyant, it was 2 steps forward, but input prices moved them 2 steps back. But they're now 2 steps back, and they don't have that increase in prices, so they're really feeling a double knock-on effect. And I think every farmer's now addressing, what do they do with their stores? Do they put them out to grass? Are they prepared to pay for the fertiliser? Or do they put them onto a market, which is a bit unknown at the moment how it's going to go?
So going forward, BCMS tell us that cattle numbers are reasonably steady for the first half of the year. So all being normal and all being well and retail demand lifting as we go into the spring, we would expect cattle numbers to tighten coming in for processing, which should keep the price where it is or better. The challenge comes towards the second half of the year. They are anticipating slightly more slaughter age cattle available. And again, very much depends on demand as to how that impacts the price. And we have to be aware that in Southern Ireland, cattle numbers look to be rising again. They killed significantly less cattle last year, about 60 to 70,000 head less last year. And obviously there wasn't the imports coming in because of the food service sector. So we might have an impact of slightly higher imports coming in this year, which might subdue the prices slightly. But I think that where the prices are levelled at the moment, they'll continue within that level, which is positive. On a global front, there is a global shortage of beef, which is great news for us all. Initially, when all the trade deals got talked about, the Australia, New Zealand trade deals, we were all a bit apprehensive about what that would mean for our industry. And in reality, those countries, Australia and New Zealand, are far closer to a bigger market in China than to us. And at the moment, Australia has the highest global beef price. It's bouncing about £6 a kilo equivalent dead weight. And New Zealand's actually priced relatively close to where Southern Ireland is in terms of price. So in reality, it's just not going to work. It's not an effort that they would make to import to us. So I think we've got to take the positive from that we're in a growing population where there's demand for beef. And the main challenges this year, as we've spoken about, is the feed and the fertiliser. And it really is now that we have to make the decision, if you're restocking, if you've got the the feed and the forage available to restock, keep them in the house and push them on, then keep going like that. The grazing cattle is just making sure you have enough feed in the grass, that if you do buy those cattle, that they're not going to weather, they're not going to go backwards. The key thing with all these finishing cattle is just to keep them moving.
So as we go through into March now, one of the biggest times for lambing and calving, increase in costs and feed. And so we have to question ourselves and actually say, store cattle that we have at the moment, do we actually destine them to go out to grass, or do we actually just put them away as stores? If they're going to go away as stores, we maybe have to get them ready now and get them destined, so if we make that decision, they're ready to go. But what every farm we should really be doing now is looking at our forage supplies, looking at our grain supplies, what feed supplies we've got, and making sure we've got what we need for lambing time and calving time, because that may make the decision on what we do with our stores. I think everybody's got to make sure they're actually well aware that they've got enough feed to cover them if you're not wanting to pay for additional feed to come in. We've also got to make sure that if we're going to have a high fertiliser price this year, and we're not wanting to put so much fertiliser out, that we do more of our nutrient management planning and put what we're doing to do with our slurry and our dung and that, because that holds the key to it. If we can get good planning there and get that analysed, get your slurry analysed, get your soils analysed so we get it right, because that could help us. And I think that's a major thing we need to be looking at this year, because fertiliser prices, it is gone from from £300 a tonne to £750, £800 a tonne. It really has a big on effects. So what we've got to do is look at our feed supplies, look at what we're wanting to pay, and also make sure that we're going out there and getting our grass right. And that might be slurry management we need to get right, because the fertiliser's not going on there. But we need to make the decisions quite clearly as well, what we want to do with our stores. Are we going to keep the stores and put them out to grass, or are we going to put them to the market? Look at what the markets are doing. But if we all supply the market, oversupply the market, then actually the price could come down. But the start of March should be quite strong for the big type cattle that are wanted down south and here. So there should be good competition for them. But really, the big question is, as we go later on, lighter cattle, more destined for grass, is actually what's going to happen to them. So get your slurry and management planning done for that time.
It's broadly been a mild winter, but at the moment we're caught between two storms, Dudley and Eunice, so I hope these aren't causing you too much disruption. As we're approaching spring lambing and calving, it's a good time to speak to your vet about metabolic profiling. So this is commonly done in dairy herds to assess nutritional status, but every year we see losses in suckler calves and in lambs that are due to nutritional issues in their dams. Blood sampling of the cows about a month before calving or ewes about 3 weeks before lambing can help you assess protein, energy and mineral status, but still have enough time to address if there are any issues, so that hopefully we can minimise any problems with ketosis or twin lamb disease, ensure that colostrum will be of good quality, and ensure there aren't any ongoing problems with ongoing fertility. We've been getting reports across the country of high barren rates in flocks, or possibly problems with early embryonic loss. And these can be really challenging issues to try to get to the bottom of. The first thing that's important to try to determine, if you can, is whether the ewes or the hogs were in lamb in the first place. Is it a tup fertility issue, or have the ewes been too fit or too lean at the time of service that they haven't conceived? If they have conceived, could it be that an infectious agent has caused an early embryonic loss? Is it seen at scanning time that there's evidence of early embryonic loss? Speak to your vet about this, because it might be worth getting samples taken, perhaps doing sampling for toxoplasma or Borders disease or tick-borne fever, these infectious agents that can cause early embryonic loss, or perhaps assessing trace elements, even if that testing is done just to rule out that that's been the cause of the problem. If there have been problems with early embryonic loss, as the season progresses and you get closer to lambing time, you might also begin to see abortions. If this happens, then perhaps investigating the aborted fetuses and placenta might be our best way of achieving a diagnosis. So if you're submitting samples, ensure the whole fetus and as much of the placenta is available for examination. This can either be taken to a post-mortem site, or your vet can take samples to screen for the most common infectious causes of abortion. And if you get the diagnosis, then hopefully you can put in a plan to reduce losses in future years. In flocks that do vaccinate against EAE and toxo, the most common causes of ovine abortion, this year we've been seeing losses due to salmonella outbreaks or Campylobacter fetus. It's important both with aborted lambs and aborted calves to ensure as much of the fetus, well, the whole fetus and as much of the placenta is available for examination as possible. This can either be submitted to a post-mortem centre, or your vet can take samples to rule in or rule out the most common infectious causes of abortion. If we make a diagnosis, then hopefully you can put in a plan to minimise losses in future years. With snow forecast in the next few days, it's worth remembering that this is a time of year that we often see cases of plant poisoning, particularly in sheep. So if there's snow on the ground, perhaps the grass is less accessible, sheep will go straying and looking for other sources of forage. So the common types of plant poisoning we see are pieris and rhododendron poisoning. These might present as animals having gut pain or perhaps grinding their teeth, or in extreme cases sometimes regurgitation. Often the first sign though is sudden death. I suppose the other opportunity for there to be plant poisoning is if storm damage has caused trees to come down or branches to blow from nearby fields, and sometimes we'll get cases of yew tree poisoning or acorn poisoning in that sort of scenario. The other toxicity that's worth remembering at this time of year is copper poisoning. In recent years, we've seen several cases of copper poisoning associated with spreading of distillery byproducts on pasture, and this can be really high in copper. In affected flocks, it's often been because the sheep affected have already had another source of copper given to them, so perhaps a bolus, or there's already copper in their concentrate feeding. So bear that in mind if you're using this product. Perhaps blood sample sheep to assess their copper status beforehand, and be mindful of any other sources of copper that you're giving them. Well, I hope the storms pass without too much disruption, and we'll see you next time on FAS TV.